I don't quite know how I can follow that, actually. I feel like I should just go now. Hello, I'm glad you've all had a lovely day. Before I start, I just want to say how overjoyed I am to be here, which I know is a little bit kind of cheesy, but there are two reasons why I'm really pleased to be here, particularly. First is, I followed the GOTO conference series as a kind of admirer from a distance for quite a while now, and I've always been awe-inspired by the amazing speakers, and so I'm humbled and honored to be up here today, and feeling a little bit spoiled, to be completely honest with you. And the second reason is Berlin's just the most amazing city. So I've been here once before, and I spent the day walking around. I had a spare day. I spent the day walking around, just awed by the kind of history of the city. And I think for me, the city of Berlin really seemed like a city that really talked about and was a symbol of unity through adversity and difficult times. And so this feels like a really, really good place to be right now. So I'm going to talk about neurodiversity and software development. Nobody really calls me Dr. Sallyann Freudenberg, though, to be honest. Everyone just calls me Sal. So please, if you want to ask me a question or anything over the next day or so, don't run after me saying Dr. Freudenberg, because I'll be looking around wondering where the mad scientist is. Just call me Sal, that's fine. And this talk came about, a couple of things kind of came together. So I've been in IT over 25 years. I've been a developer. One of my first jobs out of university was developing middleware for real-time process control systems for nuclear power stations, and I've also done some work in the water board. I've been a developer, designer, analyst. I've been a project manager, and I've been doing kind of lean and agile stuff for the last 15 years or so. And I've also got a PhD, and my PhD, although it comes from a laboratory where it kind of actually should be classed as computer science and artificial intelligence, I specialized in the psychology of collaborative software development. So I have a background in cognitive psychology and collaboration as well. And as part of my PhD, I did lots and lots of research, found out lots of really interesting things about, how the brain tames this incredibly complex domain that we all work in. And then that kind of went by the by, and I went back to work after I finished my PhD and carried on doing stuff. And about 10 years later, some folks kind of said to me, "Hey, Sal, I'm sure you did some research on pair programming. Where is it? I can't find it." So I started blogging again. And as I started blogging, I realized that there's all kinds of things we know about. There's some fantastic bits of research that we know about how people develop software. So I got kind of back into that and back re-enthused about that. And then at the same time as this was happening a couple of years ago, my eldest son, who's now 11, got diagnosed with autism. And as a researcher, I was like, wow, fascinating, right? I need to go and find out everything I can possibly can about the autistic spectrum and what it means for him to be autistic. And the more I read and the more I looked, and so I was kind of watching talks and reading and going to meetings and training courses and all that kind of stuff, really immersing myself in the autistic literature and the autistic world. And it all started to seem a bit familiar, actually. And I started to read things and think, do you know what? I think I do that a bit, or I think I think like that, or I think I struggle with that. And so I started to wonder whether I might be autistic too. And I'm pretty lucky. My younger sister, has a double doctorate, and she's a clinical psychologist, so that's quite handy. So I phoned her up and said, Tess, Zach's got this diagnosis, I've been reading stuff, I think I might be on the autistic spectrum, what do you think? And my sister said, she's very diplomatic, my sister, so she said, I don't know if you'd absolutely get a formal diagnosis, but you've definitely got lots of traits. So that's like a yes, really, from her. She's just being polite. She was being polite. So I thought, okay, that's quite interesting. And then I went online and I did some tests. So here I am. This is the data. So this is the AQ test, the Autistic Quotient test. You can take it online. It's created by Simon Baron-Cohen from the University of Cambridge. Well, you can see there the dotted line, that's the control group, so people who aren't diagnosed with autism. The straight line is people who are diagnosed as autistic, and that's me. So I score 41, which is quite impressive, I think. And then this is the RIPVO test. So this is a test that's preferred by some, particularly clinicians, because it gets really good inter-rater reliability. And you can see here that the threshold values for suspected autism in the total score is 65, and I score a whopping 155. And you can see again how that relates to various different sectors and different things. So that's this year I retook that test. So I struggle with things like non-structured social environments. I probably won't last long at any kind of after event this evening if there's not structure and I'm not just talking to a few people. I struggle a little bit with attention span. I struggle with some sensory things, and sometimes when I don't know how to be, I do this kind of extreme mimicking. So just in case you feel like you need to come up and talk to me, and it seems like I might be teasing you because I'm mimicking your body language, and I even absorb accents after a little while, which is going to be quite amusing if you're watching, then no, that's all just part of who I am. Okay, so I'm just going to back off from the autism for a little bit, and we'll come back to it in a minute. As an autistic, I struggle with people, and I've always been quite logic-minded, and I've always found people to be a little bit messy and a little bit complicated. And so I decided I'd kind of lean into that a little bit. And some of the stuff that I looked at on my PhD was about some of the messier side of, what it means to be a human who's developing software. And one of the things I came across relatively early on, I guess, was the work of Ed Hutchins, who talks about distributed cognition, who talks about the fact that we don't develop software in a vacuum. That actually, a team of software developers are part of an ecosystem of people, of tools, of the environment that they're in. And all of those things together, that kind of complicated knitting together of things, is what allows software to emerge. And I'm sorry, I try and take contextual photos, but I haven't been anywhere here to this time, so this is just out of the window. But I thought the bus is kind of doing that. There's a driver, he's got the wheel giving him feedback, he's got the kind of traffic lights, you can see the people all around him. So hence the picture. Oh. Okay. And then, as well, it's nice to think that we know what we know. But actually, a lot of the research shows that we have this knowledge, particularly as we learn more and become more expert in our domain. We have this knowledge that's tacit knowledge. We have this knowledge that we can't really access necessarily in a kind of straightforward way. We have this kind of gut feel. Sometimes you hear people saying that just didn't smell right. And I think of tacit knowledge as like compiled code we've lost the source code for, right? We're not quite sure how it got there, but we know that we can do this stuff. And one of the interesting things about tacit knowledge is it's so kind of embedded that actually when we try and work out how we know stuff, we get it wrong a lot of the time. So this study, the reason this has got tablets on is there was a study by Erin de Boulay that looked at medical practitioners, so what my children call real doctors, not like mummy. And they looked at medical doctors and they said, oh, okay, how do you get to a diagnosis? How do you get to diagnosis? How do you know when something's wrong with someone? And the doctors were able to pretty much flowchart out their decision process, right? So we thought it might be this, we discounted this thing, we did a little test here, we tried this drug, that didn't work, we tried this other thing, and then we worked out this is what it was. And they were really good at doing that retrospectively. So they could say, how did you get to this particular diagnosis for this particular patient? And they'll say, oh, well, I did this, and I did this, and blah, 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 blah. And actually, it turns out, although they can retrospectively apply logic to their tacit knowledge, it doesn't actually match what they did at all. Okay? So it's kind of this hidden knowledge, this gut feel that we have. And software development's a creative endeavor too. So this is a very old model of creativity from 1926 from Wallace. He says there's 5 stages, but these are the 4 I want to talk about. That there are stages to creativity that we need to prepare when we're solving particularly tricky problems, I think, in our domain, right? So we need to prepare where we get lots of data and information and we think about what it is we want to solve. And then we need to go away and incubate. And that's the bit that really fascinates me. That actually with tricky, intractable problems, we need to go away and incubate a solution. And that we do that incubation best when we move away from the problem space. And I know you've all been there, right? So it's 10 o'clock in the evening. You're kind of like, I can't solve this, I can't solve this, I can't solve this. Maybe somebody in your office tells you, or maybe someone at home rings you and says, look, just come home, just give it up for the night. You're okay, and you go home, and you have a sleep, and you wake up in the next morning, and maybe you're in the shower or walking the dog or whatever, and you think, I know what the answer is. It was so simple. How could I not have seen that before? And that's because you've been through the incubation period. So you've gone away from the problem, and there are lots of things we know help with incubation, like repetitive physical activities like juggling or walking can help. Physically moving away from the environment that you're in, going into a very different kind of environment with different colors, different sounds, different textures. So the slide, by the way, this is a luminarium, which is a pop-up structure that's been specifically created to help people incubate creativity. And you can project things onto it, so colors, textures, you can sit in it, you can have music in it. And just in case you're wondering, this particular one's in Australia, and this is what it looks like from the outside. So it's pretty cool. But it's unlikely that your boss is going to allow you to have one in the car park, I would say. So there we are with some messiness, and I'm still grabbing hold of I really want it to be clean and I really want to understand. So, right, let's do a little thought experiment. You can help me out. You've all had a glass of wine. You'll be kind of probably... let's imagine you're in a building and you're just about to go through a door, a bit like Linda's doors this morning. You're just about to go into a door. And you open the door. So just imagine you open the doors and you see something in front of you. You go, wow. Team are collaborating really well. That's real, intense collaboration. What do you see? What does it feel like? What might you see or hear or? Nothing. Talking? Anything else? Intent? It's quite intense. There's lots of talking. There's maybe stuff up on the walls. People maybe in little huddles. And that's kind of what we think of, isn't it, when we think about collaboration. And some of the research out there about collaboration, validates that. Verbalization helps understanding. We know through talking, even if it's just to ourselves, we can sometimes get this effect called self-explanation, particularly if it's a step-by-step logic problem that we're solving. And there's been some good work by Mitchell and Chi in particular around self-explanation. And I liked all of that because actually I'm kind of a recovering talkaholic. I really like talking. I'm kind of, this is good for me because I'm talking and I like talking. So I really liked all that. And then when I was doing my research, I decided, because I liked talking so much, that what I would do is I would record lots and lots of talking. So I thought, how am I going to work out how pair programmers collaborate? I know I'll record them talking. I'll transcribe what they say, I'll split it up into sections, and then I'll look at, is it true they work at different levels of abstraction, and how do they navigate the problem space and all that kind of stuff. So I did. I recorded, this seems crazy now, I recorded, transcribed, and analyzed 14,866 sentences of pair programmer dialogue. And at the time, I didn't even think I was autistic. So, and what happened? I started to look at the data, and I separated it out into expert and novice pair programmers, and obviously there were those that were in the middle. And I looked at the differences in the ways that they interacted, And I was bemused and surprised to find that experts spoke less, significantly less than novices. I was like, oh, that's broken my view of the world. I love talking. Experts talk less, damn. And so it began to dawn on me that some of the stuff I loved, some of the stuff that I'd seen in organizations that I'd helped kind of transition to a more nimble way of working, had gone from, this environment where they sat at their computers and they got given a specification, just like I used to do back in the day, and put our headphones on and code away without really having to talk to anyone else we wanted to, and then take our headphones off at the end of the day and go home. What we've done is we swung the pendulum all the way the other way. So what we'd had is people saying, oh, working together in groups where we can overhear each other's really good, and we'd gone, oh, I know, let's just rip down all the cubicles and and let's have people working in a room pretty much like this, a huge, exclusively open plan environment. And it dawned on me that maybe what we've done is we've actually just replaced one monoculture that worked for some people and didn't work for others with another kind of monoculture that already also works for some people and doesn't work for others. And I'd seen this. I'd seen people in transitions be miserable. I'd seen people who came alive and it really worked for, but I'd seen people be miserable. I'd seen people struggle, and I'd seen people leave. So it turns out knowing when to shut up is a kind of an expert behavior. And it turns out that maybe some of the magic of collaboration happens in the quiet pieces when we're interacting rather than in the noise. And interestingly enough, several years ago, a guy called Ivan Moore talked about, and you're going to think I'm saying this wrong, but I'm not, tea-driven development, like cup of tea-driven development, where he said, do you know what I do when I'm pairing? Because you kind of need a break when you're pairing and you need incubation time. What I do is we get together, we talk about the problem we're going to solve, and then I go and make a cup of tea. Now, luckily, he really likes tea, so this is good. So he says, I go and make a cup of tea on my own, and while the kettle's boiling, I just think about the problem or whatever. I kind of have some incubation time on my own. When the kettle's finished boiling, I make the tea. I sit down with my pair partner. We drink the tea and discuss the solution, and then, only then, do we actually touch the keyboard. So it kind of fits in quite well. Then I started thinking, well, do you know what, if we need, people who are, we need talking and quiet, and we need people who thrive in noisy environments and people who are quiet in noisy environments, what other kind of diversities do we need? So I just got some positive, happy diversity quotes for you, because it feels like we need that. So here we go. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, diversity fosters new ideas. Diversity isn't just sound policy, it's the engine of invention. And if that just sounds like politics, then there's two really good books that talk about this idea that actually groups of people who are different solve problems. Particularly in Scott Page's book, excuse the slide, but they solve difficult problems better than groups of experts in the same domain. So if you take a group of experts and you take a random group, as long as the problem's hard enough and the people are smart, and they come with different heuristics, different knowledge, different ways of doing things, then the diverse groups almost always outperform groups of experts. And as we saw this morning, as Linda said, we have to get used to the idea that collaboration isn't just about the easy stuff. It's not about just working with people who are like us. I kind of tremor a little bit when I hear people say, oh, do you know what? Actually, we recruit for cultural fit. I go, oh, really? You're going to get everybody the same? That's like a monoculture. Years ago, I worked for IBM. I remember going in for a review, which was great. I got really good scores. And then right at the end, my manager said to me, but I don't think you're an IBM kind of a person. I was like, is that because I get changed and go and play the bass in a punk band after work? Probably not. But so there's that kind of need for similarity that isn't really helping us with our collaboration. So Catherine Kirk, very lovely Catherine Kirk over here, and I decided we'd do something about it. And we've created a campaign, we founded a campaign called Inclusive Collaboration. It's not for profit. We have badges and stickers and a book out in the hallway. They're free. Fill your boots, tell people about inclusivity. And we created this to try and kick against the monoculture a bit. We've created this to help people understand not just that we need all kinds of brains to solve some of the industry's intractable problems, but actually that as an industry, it's our responsibility to help those people to flourish, to help everyone flourish. And Catherine and I are pretty different too, so we're learning about that as we go along as well. And that we've created in honor of our late friend and mentor, Jean Baker, who pretty much wrote the book on agile collaboration. Okay, and just in case you're thinking, well, you know, I haven't got autism, I don't feel that different to my colleagues, how does this apply to me? I'm going to show you some people who don't have autism, who aren't autistic, struggling in the environments that we create for them, okay? So this is a friend of mine working at an organization where I was coaching for a couple of years, actually, who broke down and made everything very modern. There's these breakout spaces where you can have conversations. It's really lovely. And she gets headaches, and her team made her a visor out of Post-it notes because she couldn't cope with the environment. There's basically nowhere to hide in these environments. So this is actually one of Catherine's pictures. This is somebody, you know, who's a little introverted, who wants some quiet time to focus on something, and had to resort to hiding between two portable whiteboards to find somewhere quiet to work. How crazy is that? And yet these are the environments that we're making. Okay, so there are many types of diversity. I believe that we're an industry of thinkers, so my focus at the moment and for the last couple of years has been very firmly on neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the idea that things like autism, ADHD, bipolar disorder, whatever, are actually not illnesses so much as they're natural variations in the human genome. And that rather than look at them as things to be cured, actually, we'd be better looking at them as just part of the human condition, and that we should create environments that are supportive. Okay, so that's what neurodiversity means, and it's kind of sprung out of the autism movement initially. Okay, just gonna have a drink. So, autism. Autism is said to affect 1 in 68 people in the latest kind of statistics. And there's a lot of evidence to show that there's a link between autism and tech. Okay? There are loads and loads of studies out there that make a very compelling story between all of them. This is just 4 examples. So autism occurs more often in families of physicists, engineering, and maths. Mothers of autistic kids are more likely to work in highly technical occupations. There's significantly more autism in IT-rich regions than non-IT-rich regions. And autistic spectrum disorder students are more likely to favor STEM subjects at college. So there's a lot of evidence out there to link. Okay, so this fantastic lady is Temple Grandin. Has anybody heard of Temple Grandin? Hands up, a few. So Temple Grandin, sorry, I should say, that's my husband, that's me, and that's my son, and Temple Grandin is the one in the middle. Temple Grandin is probably the most famous autist in the world, I'd say. So she was completely nonverbal to the age of 4. She is now a university professor in America. She splits her time between 2 different things. One is she specializes in cattle handling systems and humane animal husbandry. So well over half of the cattle handling systems in America are based on her designs. She's a very, very smart lady. And the other half of her time, she advocates for autism and talks about her experience with autism. And Temple Grandin, the reason I put Temple in this talk is that one thing I noticed a couple of years ago about Temple Grandin is she's talking at a lot of tech places. So you can go onto YouTube and find Temple talking at Google or, different places, and she'll say stuff like, do you know what, we don't want to wipe out autism, because if there was no autism, you wouldn't have any employees. And if there was no autism, you better really like your computer, because you're never going to get another one. And in fact, she even goes so far as to say, if there was no autism, do you know what, we'd have never really worked out how fire works. We'd all just be sitting around yakety and never built tools and stuff like that. Kind of be overly social. Okay. So this is Steve Silverman. I don't know if anyone's come across Steve Silverman. Great TED Talk, The Forgotten History of Autism. And I put Steve up here because he has a great quote for understanding autism, which is, by autistic standards, the neurotypical brain is easily distractible, obsessively social, and suffers from a deficit of attention to detail. And I like that, because it's kind of twisting everything around and saying, how does the neurotypical brain look to somebody who's autistic? So why would autism be helpful in tech? Well, autists very often have specialist interests. They very often have specialist interests about which they kind of compile and like to have encyclopedic knowledge. I went to Comic-Con this year in Exeter. First year there's been a Comic-Con in Exeter. I was very pleased. And I walked past this stall, and I thought, oh, they're nice photos. And I got talking to the guy who runs the store, and he said, oh no, these are my son's drawings. And I was like, whoa, they're amazing. And he said, yeah, my son's autistic. So we got talking. And I said, well, tell me a bit about it. He said, well, yeah, he was really poorly served by the educational system, which unfortunately is a story I hear a lot. And so he completely withdrew from school. I think he said he was about 14 at the time. And he went to his bedroom and decided he was going to teach himself to draw. And he obsessively drew and drew and drew and drew and drew. And I don't know for sure, but the way the guy kind of told me the story, it sounded like he didn't show anyone his pictures for a long time. So there's this little boy drawing in his bedroom. And then his dad told me this, and I tell you, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said, after 2 years, my son walked out of his bedroom with this. Oh, not that. And I was like, whoa. So, and you can see his work here, the artist Baker. Is this somebody who has an innate ability to draw? I think it probably is. Like, he's super talented, but also the fact that he was like, my specialist subject's drawing, I'm just going to draw until I get really good at it and kind of get obsessed about it, has to have played a part in him getting that good. And I think, why would you not want someone like that on your tech team? Why would you not like somebody who knows like every single library function, every single is like, oh, I've memorized all the good bits of code I've ever seen. I remember I wish I could remember who it was, but I remember going to a talk a while ago that said if you ask if you ask a developer, if you put their own code in front of them and ask them who wrote it, within about a week they're not sure, and they think it's a bit rubbish actually. So, okay. So special interests. People with autism also, I've stopped saying people with autism, autistic people, usually are much more tolerant of doing repetitive tasks. By the way, I always say this at some point, so I'm going to say it now. These are all sweeping generalizations, okay? There's not such thing as like a typical autist, so I'm just giving you a flavor. But can be that we find repetitive tasks really nice and calming. So you know those things that you think, oh, nobody would really want to do that? It's probably best to check with people, because actually, for some folks, repetitive kind of work can be really calming. And I spoke to somebody, I was giving a keynote in Canada this summer, and I spoke to somebody there who'd worked with an autistic tester who could just go through loads and loads and loads of web pages and say, that one doesn't comply with our standards, that one doesn't comply with our standards, but just wouldn't mind at all going through loads and loads and hundreds and hundreds of these things. And similarly could do really amazing data cleansing as well without getting bored of it. Temple Grandin believes, and many other people believe as well, that the particular kind of autistic brain that's drawn to software development is very good at Visio spatial thinking too. So very good at thinking rather than how something works, kind of visualizing where it is in space. And that really works for me. I can remember once working on a really tricky database problem and closing my eyes and kind of almost imagining all these skyscrapers with interconnecting kind of walkways and stuff like that and walking around and that helping. And actually this reminded me of one of my very favorite, all-time favorite bits of research, which is by Marion Petrie and Alan Blackwell. And Marion and Alan took very, very experienced developers, people who seemed to be experts by their peers, and posed them really, really tricky, wicked problems, and said to them, I want you to talk us through what you're doing when you solve the problem. And so they said, okay. So they talked. And actually what Marion and Alan and the researchers were interested in wasn't what they were saying, it was what would happen when they stopped talking. So they stopped talking, and Marion and Alan, the researchers, which must have been really annoying, said, what's happening now? What's happening now? What's happening now? And they're like, shh, I'm trying to think, what's happening now? What's happening now? And eventually, when they answered, they were baffled themselves to realize that they started to describe these multi-dimensional, really rich Visio-spatial 3D, 4D, 5D models that they had of the problem. So they said things like, I've got some quotes here, they said stuff like, it's like a great bristling multicolored scaffolding of pipework and gadgets floating in space. Wow. Oh, that happens over there, it's on the horizon, so I can keep an eye on it, but I really don't need to know. Or, it's like describing all the problems, all the dimensions of a problem in 3D, but there's an extra dimension where I can actually tell how close we are to a solution as well. And with these models, they were stoppably dynamic, so they could, a bit like a debugger, they could run them forward a little bit and then stop and then reverse a bit and change something and run them forward a bit. And these help them with problem solving. So that's some of the kind of superpowers of the autistic brain. Along with that comes some difficulties, comes some areas of challenge, okay? One of which is language and communication. Autists may not be very good at getting off their specialist subject. See, I'm in my element right now. This is my specialist subject. I get to just talk about it. They might not be very good with turn taking. They might even talk about their specialist subject when it's entirely inappropriate. So my son, this is a lovely picture I'm going to paint for you right now, had norovirus, just continual vomiting for a week thing. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, he's in the bathroom, being sick. He looks up at me, he says, Mummy, and I think he's going to say something like, I feel terrible, or can I have a hug, or can I have a glass of water? He says, Mummy, and I say, what? And he says, Super Mario? I'm like, okay, right, so specialist subject fixation in a, not necessarily terribly suitable moment. So that's language and communication. Social and emotional issues, stuff like, I already mentioned, stuff like unstructured parts of the day, stuff like collaborating intensely, stuff like eye contact. One of the reasons I struggle in cocktail parties and stuff like that is that I don't really understand what the rules are. What are the rules? I don't know. Is it okay to start a new conversation with somebody right now? When can I leave a conversation without being rude? I don't know. Can I go home? Is that rude? How long do I stay? Oh, and then I it all just get completely befuddled. I heard a few grunts of agreement there, I think. And also, that I listen my hardest when I exclude other input. So if you're ever talking to me and you try and explain something quite complex and I stop looking at you, it's not because I don't want to look at you, it's because actually when I look at the floor, and it's the same when I'm talking as well, when I look at the floor, I can better listen to the words that you're saying. I can really focus on the words, which I can't do when I'm looking at your face. Okay, and the third, which is flexibility of thought. So flexibility of thought includes things like struggling with changes of routine and surprises, literal thinking. So maybe someone says, I've got butterflies in my stomach, and you're kind of picturing they've really got butterflies, and like, what could they have eaten? But also theory of mind. So theory of mind is understanding that other people don't know what you know. Other people won't react the way that you react to stuff. Other people aren't feeling the way that you're feeling. So those are the kind of three areas. And you need, for a kind of formal diagnosis of autism, you need to score on all of those. So there's also sensory processing disorder. Sensory processing disorder is like a miscalibration. So I can be over or undersensitive on any of the senses. So, so those might be the senses that we think of all the time. So I might be oversensitive to noise. GOTO have been amazing and created a quiet room here, which I have taken sanctuary in already for about an hour today. It's really wonderful. So if you are oversensitive to noise and you needed like a break from the noise and the social contact, that's amazing. But it also shows how if you're oversensitive to noise, these kind of exclusively open plan environments just aren't going to work for you. You can also be undersensitive to touch, and maybe on your team you've had somebody who really whacks the keys on your keyboard and it seems kind of annoying. Possibly, right, that might be just so that they're undersensitive to touch and they can get enough feedback for them to realize that their fingers have pressed the keys. Sorry? Well, yeah, and so they might be undersensitive to sound too, right? And so these things you can be, you imagine like a mixing desk, things can be turned up and turned down. So I just want to focus on two of the senses that are a bit less common for us to think about. One is the vestibular system, which is your inner ear that tells you about balance. So if you have somebody who needs to rock on their chair a little bit, sometimes that's re-stimulating their vestibular system so that can help them balance. And the last one is the proprioceptive system. So the proprioceptive system helps your body understand where it's physically located in space, okay? So if you'd like to, I offer you the opportunity to close your eyes and put your right arm out. Try not to bang the person next to you. You can do this in your own time if you don't want to do it now, but you feel free to do it now. If you close your eyes and then touch your nose with your finger, that's your proprioceptive system that lets your body know where your finger is, because there's no other sensors helping you to do that. And so if we struggle with your proprioceptive system, you may need to walk about a lot or spin around to reestablish where your body is in space. Okay, so this is Jamie. This is Jamie Knight. Jamie Knight's a senior accessibility specialist and developer for the BBC in the UK. Jamie's kind of, I was embarrassing by saying this, Jamie's my autism hero, really. Jamie's a dev, he's written code that runs in space. And Jamie masked his autism for a long time, and eventually it made him ill. And so now he's decided that he's going to explore what it means to be autistically happy. So he no longer masks when he has a thing that he needs to do or a thing that he struggles with. He just struggles with it. And he's trying to find a way through that, a way that he can exist as an autist and have a happy life. So he's a talented developer. Two things you'll notice straight away from him. One is this is Sallyann. So Jamie and Sallyann go everywhere together. Jamie's quite happy to say, I'm not deluded. I know he's not real or alive, but actually he helps me in awkward situations. If people want to give me a hug, I just give them Sallyann. They hug Sallyann instead. So Jamie's got a job. Sallyan's got a job too. Sallyann is head of antelope management at the BBC. Jamie always says that's because Sallyann said he was, and everyone's too frightened to argue. So that's the first thing to notice for Jamie just by looking at him. The second thing is that he's wearing this vest, this funny kind of vest thing. And Jamie calls that his squeezy vest. So it's got a little pump. Because his proprioceptive system is a little bit miscalibrated, sometimes, he says, particularly when he's stressed out, not only does he not realize where his body is in space, he actually forgets that he's got a shape. He says it feels like his atoms are just kind of going all over the place. And he can pump up this vest to apply pressure to his body to remind him that he's got a shape. Jamie's also done some really cool things with technology to help him. So he's changed the fire alarms in his house so that they're not too noisy and freaky when they go off. He's can activate on his phone when he's feeling panicky and have all the lights in his flat will dim. So yeah, Jamie's very, very inspirational. If you get a chance to see him speak, because very occasionally he does speak. He's predominantly non-verbal, but he's on Twitter. And occasionally he does do talks at conferences. He says it takes him about 50 hours to prepare for a 1-hour talk. He can talk in this kind of structured environment because the social interaction's really not two-way, so that works. Okay. And he struggles with things. So he struggles with crossing roads, for example, because he'll stand at the side of the road and start getting obsessed with the patterns that he can see, like red car, blue car, red car, blue car, red car, blue car, and then hop, oh. So he has to have people with him. Okay, I'm not going to cover all the other things there. But what I would like to do is just cover some of the practical things that we know already helps or that you can add to help even more. So I put this up here, 9 o'clock. Having a daily meeting at the same time in the same place with the same kind of structure, really calming, no change of routine, really practical, that would really work. Using personas or having some way of understanding that when you're developing software, you're not developing it for yourself, really helpful with theory of mind. How are we doing for time? I've been tiny bit cheeky here because I put, this is a planner, an activity planner for an autistic child, and this is a kind of Kanban board. Not being rude, I like both of these things. But you can see how actually having some way of physically being able to see the structure, like tangibly being able to see the work that you're doing. Where am I? What's completed? What am I doing right now? What's next? Actually, for my son, even having a space that says between this time and this time, we're going to have unstructured time kind of helps him because he knows to expect that there's some unstructured time coming up. In meetings, we can be structured, have a clear purpose, give an agenda out in advance, let people know who's going to be there in advance, write down actions really clearly and concisely, give people time ahead to think about things. So I've always been, and I've loved that, let's do a retrospective. At the last minute, I'll tell you what it's going to be. All think on your feet. You get 3 minutes to write onto Post-it notes, and then bam, we're going to get some insight. And now I'm kind of like, do you know what? We need to embrace the fact that there will be people who will want to think through things carefully in advance before they're able to contribute. Again, I don't know if you've come across them. I've worked with all kinds of people. I've worked with people who will hardly say anything all day, and then at the end of the day, they will come out with one beautifully thought out, perfectly delivered sentence that will just make everyone go, whoa. I want that in my meeting. And keep meetings short. Maybe have some working agreements. So again, this is for an autistic child. It says things like, at home I can relax and take a deep breath, ask someone for help, be polite and respectful. I never scream, run away, have a tantrum. See, some meetings I've been to, we would have needed that. Hopefully not needed, I never spit or hit or kick other people though. But actually just having some ground rules of how we're going to work together, some working agreements up front, really, really helpful. Capitalizing on special interests. Oh, sorry, we've lost some text. We had to swap laptops. Capitalize and expand upon specialisms, that says. So a friend of mine in the States told me that they had somebody on their team, in their department, who was absolutely obsessed with coding standards. Right? So whenever they had a team meeting, this person would be like, oh, well, no, that contravenes coding standard number 3.2.4.1.6 or whatever. And it kind of drove everyone a little bit crazy. So what they did was they took that person and said, you love coding standards. Do you know what? How about we make you the person who trains people in coding standards when they join the company? And you can start a community of practice about it, and you can do that. So really finding ways of capitalizing on people's specialisms and maybe just expanding them gently, rather than expecting people to go off on a complete tangent and do something that doesn't work for them at all. Provide multimodal information, not just text. I'm proud of this side. Be succinct. So one of the things I've learned to do with my son is to take away information every time I talk to him if he doesn't understand. So we used to say, Zach, can you put your shoes on? Zach, can you put your shoes on? Otherwise your feet will get cold. Zach, you need to put your shoes on. It's time for school and your feet will get cold. Zach, can you put your shoes on because it's time for school, your feet will get cold and your brothers will be late. Okay, and then what we realized is the first time he kind of might clock that there's a noise in the world. The second time he goes, oh, it's someone talking. The third time he says, they're talking to me. The fourth time he actually listens, by which time actually, most times before I understood to do this, I'd added so much information he couldn't parse what I was saying anyway. So what I now know to do is to take information away all the time. Okay, so you need to put your shoes on. Zach, shoes on, shoes, Zach, shoes. And most of the time, because I'm not a perfect parent, but most of the time, it never gets to the, right, you put your shoes on right now, because I've understood that it just takes him a while. I'm human, thank you. Just a couple more things. So this is 3 minutes 33. This is a piece of music with no notes that's completely silent. And it's just to help us to remember to actually relish the silent bits. Think about pacing, think about breaks. Understand that interacting is exhausting. Sometimes I do training courses, right? I teach all day. And then my friends will say, oh, you're in the city. Brilliant, let's go out. And I'm like, I've interacted with people all day. I'm going home to my hotel room to sit in the dark, to lie down in the dark with a cold flannel on my head and talk to no one for a couple of hours because I'm absolutely exhausted. Help provide structure. So I tell you, in social events, quite often I go off and do the dishes because that's like, it's a repetitive task, it's calming, it's structured. I can go to people and say, hello, how are you? Can I take your plate? And then I don't have to interact with them anymore if I can't cope with it. So find ways of them helping them to do that. Find ways of maybe being sensitive to prolonged eye contact. If you've got a difficult conversation to have with someone in your team, go for a walk so they're next to you. So they don't have to look in your face the whole time. Last slides. So, continually busy, noisy, open plan spaces with lots on the wall might not be the best option for everyone. We need to offer alternatives. We need to find kind, inclusive, safe places where people that cater to people's varying needs without singling people out as well, because let's face it, it's much easier to say, I think I'm just going to go and have a cup of tea, than it is to say, oh, I just need to stand up a minute to reestablish my body's position in space. And learn to be okay with being quiet. That's been a really tough one with me. And what I've started to learn is actually you can fake it. And this is Jean Baker coming right out of my mouth right now. Ask a question of a group. Give them space to answer. And if you struggle, behind your back, you can count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time you get to about 8, someone in the group will have got more uncomfortable with you with the silence, and they'll say something. Okay. So, there's a book of experiments that I threw together very quickly in about 3 weeks, mostly in the evenings, because Catherine and I wanted to get something out there for people that was helpful to people. It really is a bunch of experiments. It doesn't tell you how to be more inclusive, but what it does is gives you some ideas of things that you can try to help you start to think about how to be more inclusive. Go and do little field trips in your workplace. Have little sessions where you think about the kinds of thinkers you've got on your team. That's free. There are 50 copies here. I don't know how many are left now, but there's some copies out there on the table. It's free on LeanPub or Pay What You Think. I think it's $10 on Lulu, but anyway, so you can have it for free if you like. There's a quiet room here. Go and use the quiet room. Look, it's lovely, and it's quiet. You can even have a little nap in there. That's it for content. I have lots of references of papers and research. Still got a bit of the academic in me, so that's there still. There are some companies out there doing great things. There are even more and more consultancies that are specifically training up and placing autistic folk in organizations. That's it. Thank you very much.
If you have questions, please come forth to the microphone. Otherwise, I will start with one question. I have a lot of positive feedback in here that I will show you later, but there's also one question. So, do you have any idea how to spread the idea about being different than normal, standard, but being valuable, and not being Rain Man kind of savant? Savant?
Savant, yeah, or savant. Yeah, so I think Rain Man was really good for the autistic world in that it raised awareness of autism as a thing. But unfortunately, what it also did is everyone thinks if you're autistic, then you will be Rain Man. So like you'll have this special ability to count matchsticks when you know how many matchsticks are on the floor or whatever it is. But you'll, I don't know, buy your Y-fronts from Kmart or whatever it was that he did. Anyway, so useful in some ways, but not in others. And I think that's why I'm here, that's what I'm aiming to do, that's what the campaign's aiming to do. We are absolutely reaching out to anybody who would like to be involved as an ambassador for us and help us spread the word. So that's what we're doing. That's what I hope these talks are doing. How do you do it in your organizations? I think just start the conversation. I think there's a huge chance. Let's face it, like one person in 68 in the general population is autistic. We know that that's going to be a higher number in tech. So, you know, there is definitely going to be autism in your teams, in your organizations. It's there anyway. Even if we don't specifically go out to recruit autistic people because of their amazing traits, you know, we've already got it in our organizations. And some of the stuff that we're doing that we're suggesting to help, you know, having more structure and isn't just useful to people, you know, autistic people. It's useful to everybody, right? Most people need some quiet thinking time from time to time. So offering alternatives, offering spaces to people, I don't think is necessarily just an autistic thing. It's things that can help with any kind of collaboration. And one more thing to add to that, which is particularly as we have teams now that work across business areas much more. So if we're thinking about different thinkers, you know, it's probably a person who's decided to have a career in IT is going to be quite a different kind of a thinker to somebody who's had a career in marketing. And you need to work together. So I think it's just applicable outside of the autism world too.
There are more questions just flying in. Okay, I would take this one. Does a thing like light form of autism really exist?
Oh, there's a lot of debate. So there's a lot of debate about that in the world of autism, and many autistic folk don't like the phrase high-functioning autism or mildly autistic. And one of the reasons for that is they think that it's harmful and it diminishes how much of a struggle people have. So one of the things that I sometimes get is, well, you don't seem very autistic. And one of the things we know about particularly women, but guys too, but particularly autistic women, is we're very, very good at masking. So we're good at copying, we're good at learning rules, we're good at finding ways of coping that allow us to kind of function and hide our autism. And actually, that can be quite detrimental to our mental and physical health. And so the idea is that maybe having labels like high functioning and low functioning isn't such a useful thing because it kind of can take away from the struggle that anyone with autism is having and the kind of support that they need.
Okay, one last question. Do you have any suggestions or know about the research about being inclusive in hiring practices,
That's okay.
specifically regarding challenges, interviews, stuff like this?
Okay, so I know a good place to look for that is either Microsoft or Specialist. And so and there's another open source model as well. Microsoft had an autism-specific recruitment process that they've been experimenting with. And basically what they did is they took their recruitment process, I think, from like a set of very short interviews to a 3-month process where they have people coding stuff with Lego toys, and they send people photos of. So one of the really simple things you can do: send a photo of yourself to the person if you're going to interview them. Send a photo to the room that they're going to be in. So just kind of minimize surprises. Maybe don't look for, is this person shake my hand hard and make loads of eye contact, because maybe you'll be excluding people right from the off. Temple Grandin tells a great story about the nuclear reactor in Japan that failed because you couldn't shut off the bit that you needed to shut off. She's like, I've got a visual mind, I would have seen that straight away. There was a thing with airbags and toddler seats. She's like, I would have seen that straight away because her mind works in a different way. But she's been to those companies and said, you would have screamed me out in the first 10 seconds of your interview. And again, I think this probably goes back a little bit to Linda's talk this morning, which is about we all have those inbuilt prejudices. We all have those inbuilt like you're not like me things. So maybe it's about understanding that and putting them in check a little bit, just long enough to give people the opportunities to shine, because there's some brilliant minds out there and we can't solve the problems we need to without them.
I think if there are no more questions from the audience, thank you very much for your talk.
You're welcome.